Good morning, ma'am.
Right, so under the ecosystem, we have discussed the terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. Right, so in each ecosystem, we have discussed the characteristics, examples, and the classification, that how we are classifying the specific characteristics, each and everything we have discussed, isn't it? Any other doubts in ecosystem classifications? And we have studied the aquatic ecosystem and terrestrial. Last class we have discussed about the terrestrial ecosystem, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Now we will move into new chapter, that ecological succession. Right. So with this image, right? There is in the under the title there is an image. What do you think by seeing that image? This one, ecological succession. So think about that, ecological succession, and I put one image down the topic. Do you think what's coming in your mind when you see this one? Any idea? Any idea? See, I don't want to take one side communication. I want to have one side. I don't want to have one side communication. I need two-way communication. That means when I'm talking, when I'm asking questions, you have to respond to me, right? So then only it will be more interactive and effective. Otherwise, if I'm only talking, that will get bored. Right? Yeah, two people saying it's better if you unmute and talk, because when the message is coming, I have to open it and read. If you unmute and talk, it's better. It will give more effective interactions, right? So 114 said evolution of plants. Yeah, good word you gave me, because we have to discuss the word evolution also, right? So you said evolution, right? Can you tell the meaning of evolution?
Species, a mix of species and habitat, change with the time.
Species change with the time. Okay, the sentence or statement is right? But the keyword is something is different. Right, we will discuss. Any others?
Modification.
Modification of what?
Modification of species.
Modification of species. Okay, modification of species. We can call that one as evolution.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now tell me, are there any difference? Just no need to tell. Just think. I will ask you later. Evolution versus succession. Right? Think. Right? When I'm discussing, think about that. Evolution versus succession. Grasses, shrubs, softwood trees, hardwood trees, how they are changing, how they are creating, how they are forming. We will discuss. Yes. Which one? The first slide. Yeah. Yeah. So the ecological succession. So our topic is today is ecological succession. So the succession is a process of changes. Right? The changes is happening in the biotic communities over a period. That means with the time. So day by day, hour by hour. So minute by minute. It's happening over the time in a particular place. So we will discuss further how this is happening. So this is the overall definition of this This is the overall definition of the ecological succession, right? The changes happening in the biotic communities over the time period at a particular place. We will see how it's happening, what are the steps they are, what are the process they are, what's the different classifications they are, right? Are you okay now? Yeah, right. So the gradual and predictable process. So gradual means it's a gradual process, one by one, right? So gradual process and predictable process of change in the species structure of an ecological community over the time. Right? That means it's not an unpredictable means you don't know that result. But this ecological succession is a predictable process and gradual. It will not happen suddenly. It will not happen without plan. That means it is gradually happening process, right? Gradually happening changes in a species structure. How the species structure is changing, right? So over the time. So the process begins with pioneer species. Right, that means first species, the earliest species. So the process begins with pioneer species and develops through increasing complexity until a climax community is developed. Do you remember the climax community? When I discussed in last class in the terrestrial ecosystem, I told two words. Remember the two words, no? Two things. Remember? Two things I told. One is climax community. Other one is I told one thing when we discussed that flora, fauna present in some other terrestrial ecosystem. Remember? I told these two things we will discuss in future classes. Anybody? Do you remember now the climax community I told? Unmute and talk with me. Nobody's now? Nobody remembered that one? Didn't I tell? Jamsika.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I told that two things, remember these two things, climax community and lichen and mosses when we discuss. I told remember these things, we will discuss later. Isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, this process is begin with the pioneer species. Pioneer species mean the first species, earliest species, from which species the process is start. That is pioneer species. And the process is happening, develops through the increasing complexity. The pioneer species means simple species. Yeah. Then that because of the process, the complexity will increase, right? Until a climax community is developed. You know the meaning of climax, the end, right? So climax community is developed. So until the process will happen, process will continue until the climax community is developed, right? So we can say in this process, the succession are divided into main two groups, the two classification. One is the primary succession, the other one is secondary succession, right? We will see what is the difference between primary and secondary succession, right? So until now we have discussed the definition of ecological succession, what is the process, how it's starting and ending, what's the types, right? Clear? Okay, we'll see. So you can take this as a request. Please listen to my words, and you can take some other that flow chart or some other key points with you. Don't switch on these online lectures and don't go for other words. Right? Take it as my request. It's okay. Right? Okay. So we will move on in the primary succession. So it begins in a place without any soil, right? So it begins in a place without any soil. And for example, it can be sites of volcanoes, and it can be landslides. flooding area, glacier recedings. So these are the examples without soil area, right? So if the process is beginning, if the process want to begin, first, lichens that don't need soil to survive or grow on rocks, right? So in the terrestrial ecosystem, we have discussed lichen and mosses. So the lichens don't need to have the soil. Without soil, it can grow on rocks, right? So first, the lichens will start to grow on rocks. And next, the mosses grow to hold newly made soil. So in between this, the soil will start to produce. So in that time, mosses will grow. Why mosses are growing? To hold the newly made soil. So when the soil is creating, the soil want to stable or soil want to hold in a particular place. So that time mosses will grow and it will stick or it will hold the soil, the newly made soil, right? So these first species, right? Understand these species. These are the first species on the particular area, isn't it? So these first species to populate an area are called pioneer species. That means these are the first species which are helped to populate a particular area, right? So these are pioneer species, right? So the pioneer species. See, the lichen break down rock to form a soil, right? See, lichens will start to grow on a rock, and because of the process, chemical process, the biochemical process happening in the from the lichen, it will start to break the rocks and it will help to form soils. Then, so low growing mosses plants trap the moisture and prevent soil erosion. So from this first species growing, that it will start to break the rocks and small particles of soil will be created. On that time, because when the rocks breaking down and soil are forming, there will be a small amount of moisture content will be created. So at that time, quickly the mosses will grow on the particular area. From that, it can be trap the moisture and prevent the soil erosion, because there is no any trees, no any barrier to prevent the soil erosion. So when the soil is started to create, if it is climatic change, for example, rain is happen. What will happen there? If the rain is occur in particular area, the soil will wash out from the rock and there is no any soil will be remain in the particular place. So mosses will help to retain the soil in that place, right? So this is the role of lichen and mosses. Understood the role of lichen and mosses and what is the pioneer species, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, 1 second. Right, so we will move into how these pioneer species move on to an occupied area, how the species are creating, how this process is developed, right? So first one is first process. So we have discussed the lichens and mosses, the role of lichen and mosses. Now we will discuss deeply how these processes are happening, right? So first, the pioneer species will move into an unoccupied area. That means bare land, right? That means bare land or bare areas, right? So the pioneer species helps create soil by breaking down the rock particles into smaller and smaller pieces, right? So now you know what is pioneer species. They are helping to create the soil by breaking down the rock particles, right? So as lichen and mosses die, right? So now we know in first sentence, the lichen and mosses will help to create the rocks. Think what will happen if the lichens and mosses die, what will happen? Think, without seeing the second statement, think. What will happen? Will they survive until that longer period? Will they survive longer period?
No.
Yeah. So we know that the organism has some particular period of lifespan, right? So likewise, lichen and mosses also have the lifespan. Lifespan means life cycle. Then living time, living period, right? So once the lichen and mosses die, they decomposed and add small amount of nutrient to the rock particle and also supporting creating more soils, right? So when they decompose, so when they become decomposed material, these decomposed particles will give some little amount of nutrient to the rock particle, right? Then, second thing, once there is enough soil, so from this process, soil is creating, right? So breaking down of rocks and soil is creating from the rock particle. So this process also happening. And once this enough amount of soil is created and nutrients will be derived from that dead particles of lichens and mosses, and from this enough amount of soil and nutrient, what will happen? Small plants such as flowers, ferns, grasses will start to grow, right? First pioneer species, then the pioneer species will help to break the rocks, then soil forming, then after the soil forming, so after some period, lichens and mosses, the pioneer species will die. That will add some nutrients to that community, and that will help to grow, or that will help to develop some kind of small plants, small flower plants or ferns and grasses. Right, so these plants help to further breakdowns, right? So further breakdown of after the small plants growing, what will happen? Root system will develop. That root system will break down. It will help to break down the rocks. And when these plants die, and decompose, that will add some more nutrients to that particular area. Understood? So it will create more fertility of soil, right? Then after the small plants, so these small plants create habitat for small animals like insects and small mammals. Understood? So this is a process, sequence of process. Pioneer species, it will help starting the soil formation, then the decomposition of pioneer species, then those nutrients will help for these small plants growing, then those small plants will create the habitat. So you know the keyword, habitat for small animals such as insects, butterflies and some other mammals, right? So then this happening over the time. This process, these three key points we have discussed, these are happening over a period of years, maybe or 5 years, 10 years, it may be happen. Then later, over the time, as animals die, right? So enough amount of animals may be created from the earlier processes, right? So from those, the animals die and decompose their bodies and add more nutrients to the soil and allowing the larger plant species, larger trees can be populate in the area. Understood how the larger trees is surviving in the area? If it is are there any possibilities for the larger trees growing earlier?
No, ma'am.
Large animals producing or reproducing earlier, because the word we already told, it's a gradual process. Understood? It's a gradual process from the low to high, right? From the small species, small plants, small animals to the larger animals, larger plants. Clear? So how the nutrition is creating to survival of large animals and large plants, right? Okay, so this is the basic thing of the primary succession, right? So see here, bare rock. This is summary, bare rock and lichens will develop. From the lichens, the small lichens and mosses, the small annual plants and lichens will be survive in the area. See here, right? Then from these nutrients, the nutrients, right? The grasses and perennial plants, that annual plants, perennial plants will be created. And this is from the pioneer species, right? Then that intermediate species will create it, right? So grasses, shrubs, and intolerant trees, and such as some of the pines, some of the trees will created that is intermediate species. Remember this one, intermediate species, right? Then finally the Climax community will created with the stable species, that shade tolerant trees. See here, some intolerant trees can be occur in the intermediate species, but in the Climax community only the tolerant species will be there in according to that climate and other things of the community, right? This is the primary succession, right? So eventually a mature community is formed. This mature community is called Climax community. That means matured one, the final end community. So that one is known as Climax community. So a Climax community is a community that is able to maintain itself, right? So if anything happen in this time, that means in this row, that intermediate species time, if any interruption happen, if any ecological interruptions or flooding or any other weather change happen, these species can't be survive in that area, right? But in this area, after the Climax community is created, after the Climax community is formed, whether the climate changes happen, whether any other adverse conditions happen, those plant community will strive to survive, will fight to survive. Understood the difference between Climax community and the intermediate community, right? So that in Climax community is a community that able to maintain itself for long periods of time with few changes in the species that populate it, right? Next one is, are you clear with the primary succession? Any question on primary succession?
Clear, ma'am.
Okay. Then we will move on to secondary succession. So the secondary succession is the process of repairing damaged ecosystem. Remember, the secondary succession is a repairing process, right? So it occurs in areas where the soil was left intact, right? Soil was left intact. That means, for example, events that damage the ecosystem, the natural disaster, human activities, death of organisms, right? So, for example, that we are discussing about the primary succession process. So, from the pioneer species to the Climax community, we are discussing, right? So, in between that, right? So, do you think in between that there is no any disaster, there is no any natural disaster, there is no any other activities, anthropogenic activities? Do you think? No, that means that climate changes are unpredictable, isn't it? Climate change, that means the disaster is the natural disaster is predictable or unpredictable?
Unpredictable.
That because of nowadays technology, we are predicting the possibilities, right? But it is not the natural disaster is not a gradual process. It's a sudden process, isn't it? So that it's a disaster. right? So when during the primary succession, if there is any natural disaster, if there is any interactive activities, if there is any death of organism happening, that want to recover, isn't it? That want to recover, that want to repair. So for that process, the secondary succession is helping to preparing process, right? So the secondary succession is typically a much faster process than the primary succession because there's already soil. Understood why it's so fast? Because in the primary succession, no any soil, so the soil formation is taking more time, right? Once the soil is formed, the other process will start quickly, right? So that's why we are telling the secondary succession is much faster than the primary succession because of the soil is existing there. And secondary succession is a never ending process, right? Primary succession is ending process. That means once the Climax community is produced, that process will finish. But the secondary succession is never ending process. Any disturbance in an ecosystem result in the secondary succession starting over. Understood? For example, one natural disaster is happening. See, one natural disaster is happening or anthropogenic activities is happening in a particular area. Then the ecosystem will start to run the secondary succession process. Then after that secondary succession process, this area will repaired and this area will recovered with the new plants and new organisms, right? So then the secondary succession process will stop, isn't it? Then if there is any disturbance, if there is any sudden ecosystem changes happen, then again this secondary succession will be started, right? So that is never ending process. See here, so the secondary succession looks very similar to primary succession but does not require soil forming pioneer species. See here, so earlier also we have seen one image like this, but it started with where? It started with where? Yeah, bare land or rock. But here see where is starting? For example, fire, the natural disaster or any other disturbance to the ecosystem. Yeah, tell me.
Damaged area.
Yeah, damage. Yeah, you are right. Right, so it's starting with the disaster or damage to the ecosystem. Then see here, within a year, the annual plants will grow. Why? Because it's having the soil. Understood? Right? So here the pioneer species may be the annual plants, annual small plants. Right? Here the pioneer species is not the lichen and mosses. See here, who are the pioneer species here? Annual plants. Understood? Compare. They are the pioneer species are lichen and mosses. Here the pioneer species are annual plants, right? And likewise, it will end up with the Climax community, right? Now we will move on to the causes of succession, causes of ecological succession. The climatic causes, we can say the climatic causes including temperature, rainfall, light intensity, gaseous composition, and wind also can be a climatic causes. And biotic causes, we can say these are the major causes: climatic cause, biotic cause, excessive cause, and stabilizing causes. So the biotic causes, we can say in a community, there's a competition amongst different members for their existence. So in such process, some of the members are not found suitable and thus are gradually replaced by new one, right? So because of the biotic existence, right? So the excessive causes, we can say it's related to the soil condition. So soil condition is also changing by the process of inversion, migration, competition, reaction of the populations, right? And the fourth one is stabilizing causes. That means succession is taking place in order to attain the climax stage. So So that means the stabilization, right? We will discuss about the types of successional communities. So we already discussed the pioneer community. That means that is the set of first species in a bare land. Examples include lichens on rocks, phytoplanktons, zooplanktons in ponds, and they survive in the most hostile environment, right? So bare environment, right? So next one is Climax Community. So it is the last communities in biotic succession, which is relatively stable. See, that one is stable one and near equilibrium with the environment of the area called Climax Community. Example, we can say forest, right? So forest is the Climax Community, right? And transitional or serial community are the ones that follow the pioneer community. So these serial communities are following the pioneer community. Example include bryophytes, herbs, shrubs in xerosia, submerged floating, we can say floating plants in ponds. These are the transitional communities. So they contribute maximum to the formation of stable community. The entire series of communities occurring in biotic succession is called series. Right? We will say what are the types of series, stages of serial communities. The serial stages or serial communities are individual transitional communities. So serial community means it is an intermediate stage. We already discussed that intermediate period, there are some species will survive. Those communities known as serial communities. So intermediate stage of ecological succession that advance towards the Climax community. So it consists of simple food chains and food web. But in the Climax community, there may be complex food chain and food webs will be occurred. Right, so we can say the different type of serial community. See, xerosia, that means in a dry area, right? So where the xerophytes are available. It may be rock or sand or saline conditions, right? So hydroseria, that hydro means it's related with water. Hydro, you know the word hydro. So it's that succession starts on aquatic habitat where the water is plenty and progress from the hydric to mesic condition. Right? Means that in the water condition. Lithoseria, that this ecological succession developed on a bare rock surfaces. And Pessamoseria, right? So this ecological succession is originates on a sand area. So halloseria, that means that in between the salty soil and saline water. So right, so the plant succession is begin on salty soil and saline water. And senile, this succession takes places on the dead matter of organisms. See, senile is this succession start from dead organisms. Eoseria, it shows the development of vegetation in an era. Right, these are some serial communities. If you know what is this, that is enough. You don't need to know much about this. Now we will move into the major process, that means general process of succession. So you have to remember, you may have the essay question on this ecological succession. I can ask what is the ecological succession, the definition and the basic things, and I can ask the pioneer species Climax community and general process of succession. So for example, you can have this general process of succession for 40 marks. Right, so we will see. So first one is mutation, inversion, competition and coaction, reaction, stabilization. Right, so far we have discussed is what? So far we discussed nothing.
primary succession and secondary succession.
Okay, under that, anybody?
Primary succession start with the
Then, okay, we have discussed the difference between primary succession and secondary succession and how the primary succession process is there, right? So, a different kind of succession, right? So, now we will move to general process, right? Nudation. So, nudation is the development of bare area. That means development of bare area. It is the first step in ecological succession. The causes of nudations are topographic factors, climatic factors, biotic factors. Topographic means soil related factors. So soil or topographic related causes such as soil erosion, sand deposit, landslide, volcanic activities such as the formation of bare land. How the bare land is forming. So these are the reasons: soil erosion, sand deposit, landslide, volcanic activities also the reason for the formation of land, bare land. We are talking about from the bare land these processes happening, isn't it? So how the bare land is forming? Maybe the bare land once upon a time it have the community. Because of this process, it become the bare land. Right, so how the bare land is forming. So the bare land forming is depending on three factors: topographic factor, climatic factor, biotic factor. Right. So second one is climatic factor. We can say destruction of the community due to glacier, dry period, storm. So there may be a species, there may be community. The community destruction will be happen because of the glacier and dry periods of longer dry period, storm, right? So you know that dinosaurs survive, but are there any dinosaurs there? What happened to the dinosaurs? What happened to the dinosaurs survived area? Think about that, right? So these may be the factors for nudation. Nudation, you know the nude means nothing, right? So nudation is the process of development of bare area, bare land. Here we are talking about the land. So bare land. Right. So third one is biotic factor. So biotic factor, we can say it includes forest destruction, agriculture, and disease epidemics. That also will, the disease epidemics that also create the nudation. If the disease epidemics is severe, what will happen? There will be no any species. So then, without species, that area will become nude. So that means that it will vanish, that species and organisms survive there. So which will result in the total destruction of the population in area. Without population, you may imagine what will happen to the particular area, right? So nudation is the process of development of bare land. So these are the three main factors is influence on the nudation process. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good. Then second one, in the process, inversion. So inversion is the successful establishment of species in a bare land. Right? First, bare land will created, then the establishment of species in a bare land. That is inversion. So it is a second step in ecological succession. A new species reaches the newly created bare land and they try to establish there. So they trying to surviving there, right? So the process of inversion is completed in three steps: migration, exegesis, aggregation. We'll see one by one. Migration. So migration means dispersal. It's coming to the particular area, from particular area to particular area. So seeds. We are talking about here mainly plants. So seeds, spores, propagules of species reach the bare area, bare land due to the migrations. Because that we already told in the nudation, bare land will create. How that species will come to that particular area? Because of the migration, that inversion. So migration will help to move the seeds. Once the seeds put on that land area, only it can develop as a plant, isn't it? So the seeds should come to that area. That will happen through the migration. Clear? We are talking some series of steps. That's why I'm asking, are you clear? Only I can move on further. Okay, are you clear with migration, how it's happening? Right, the migration can be achieved through air as well as water medium also, not only in the land area. It can be happening through air and water medium, right? So second one is exegesis is the process of successful establishment of a species in a bare land. That means it can seeds or spores that reach a new area due to migration will germinate and grow and reproduce. That is exegesis, that establishment. From the migration, it will come to that area. From the exegesis, it will start to germinate, grow and reproduce. Only a few progenies will survive due to the harsh environmental condition prevailing situations, right? So understood, first from the migration it's coming. Then from the exegesis, it's establishing through the process germination and growing and reproduction. Then the aggregation, the word aggregation, we can say after the exegesis, right? The individuals of the species increase their numbers and they stay close to each other. Then only they can survive in an area. If they are randomly dispersed, what will happen? They can't fight with the enemies. They can't fight for their survival. So this process is called as aggregation. Understood? Migration, exegesis, aggregation. Clear? Anybody is in doubt, please ask. Okay, shall I move?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Then third process is competition and coercion. Now think the word competition. What was happened from the aggregation? Aggregation is result in increase of numbers of species within a limited space, right? Limited space. What will happen after that? For example, we are eating from hostel canteen. If when we are going around 12 to 1 p.m., what will happen? Just think. In a limited area, everybody has a demand. For example, in a canteen, our demand is food. So we will go in a line. We will make request for food. That will create the competition for a food. Like that, aggregation result in increasing number of species. That means from the aggregation process, the number of species will increase in a particular limited space. So this results in competition between individuals for food, for space, shelter. This may be happen, right? So the competition may be intraspecific, interspecific. Intraspecific means individual within a species. Interspecific means individual between the species. I have one image. You will get clear when I show that image. See, competition may be intraspecific, interspecific. So the individual of a species affect each other lives in a various ways in this called coaction. So the individual of species. So each and every individual maybe affect the other lives. For example, the individuals are surviving. They may be surviving as a family. They may be surviving as a neighbors. They may be surviving as a friends. So one depend on other one. That the process is known coaction. So competition and coaction result in the survival because without depending on others, without communicate with others. We can't survive in a particular place, isn't it? For example, you are having a coastal group. So if you are not involved in that group, can you survive them? Can you move with the people? So likewise, that coaxium is important in a survival and survival of fit individual in a particular area. Otherwise, what will happen? If you are not set, or if you are not fit to that other individual, what will happen? If you fit with that other people, you will survive, right? If you are not fit, what will happen? You will be eliminated from that particular community. That means, for example, groups. If you fit to the groups, you will be the member of that group. If you are not fit to the group, what will happen? The other members will eliminate you. Other members will avoid you from their group. So here we are talking about the ecosystem. So if you are fit, you will survive. If you are not unfit, if you are unfit, you will be eliminated from the ecosystem. That you mean the species, right? The species will survive or species will eliminate. That will determine by the competition and coaxium, right? So a species with wide reproductive capacity and ecological amplitude only will survive. Understood? A species with wide reproductive, that effective reproductive capacity and ecological amplitude only survive in the area, right? That is competition and coaxium. See here, the intraspecific means within a species, right? So interspecific, see, different species, right? That's the competition for food or shelter. Next one is reaction. So reaction is the most important stage in the ecological succession. It is the modification of the environment through the influence of living organisms present on it. So that is modifications of the environment through the influence of living organisms present on it. So the reaction causes change in soil, water, light, temperature of the area. So due to these modifications, present community become unsuitable for the existing environmental condition. Understood what I'm telling? The reaction is taking the modification part of the ecosystem, right? Already some kind of species are started to establish and survive in the area. Now, because of the reaction process, what will happen? Modification will happen to the particular ecosystem or community. So when the modification is happening, can the animals or plants accept it readily? Can't, right? So sometimes it's become unsuitable for some existing environmental conditions. So such communities will be quickly replaced by other community. When one community is unsuitable for that will eliminate it from the ecosystem. Then immediately the other community will be replaced. That is reaction process. The whole sequence of community. Why these processes are happening? To have a stable community in the area. So the whole sequence of communities that replace one another in a given area is called series. That we already told what kind of series, right? So the various communities contributing series are called serial communities or serial stages, right? Final one, climax, that stabilization, right? So it is the large stage in the ecological succession, and also final and terminal community become more or less stabilized for longer period. So this community can maintain its equilibrium with the climate of area. And the final community is called Climax Community. As we know, the Climax Community is not immediately replaced by another, right? So here, the serial community. See, the serial community is quickly replacing by another community. But the Climax Community is not like that. It can't replaced immediately. Understood the difference between cereal community and climax community. And climax community is determined by the climate of the region. And examples of climate community, we can say forest, grassland, coral reefs. See, this is the climate community of forest, desert, grassland, coral reef. So these climax, now you know how these climax communities are formed, isn't it? So earlier those are bare land. So how these climax communities are formed, how the climates are define the climax community. See this word. See, climax community is determined by the climate of the region. So see here, the forest is determined by the climate of this region, and desert is determined by the climate of that particular region. Coral reef climate community is determined by the climate of that coral reef area, coastal area. Grassland is determined by the grassland climate and fact that the other biotic and abiotic factors, right? So you have to correlate, you have to connect all the things what we have studied earlier. So in the terrestrial ecosystem we have studied what are the factors is influencing in the formation and survival of that particular biotic and abiotic factors, right? So and we will see the different types of climaxes in the ecological succession. Now you know the climax community and different types of climax. So climatic climax and edaphic climax, catastrophic climax. The climatic climax mean in this climax the succession is determined by the climate of the region. So the climatic climax will have only one climax community. The edaphic mean, we know the edaphic mean soil factor, right? So this is determined by the soil, right? So the edaphic factor may include soil moisture, topography, soil structure, and soil nutrients. The catastrophic climax is meaning here the climax community is vulnerable to many catastrophic events such as wildfire, snowfall, and floods in different communities, right? So the catastrophic factors replace the climax community completely, and this area will be immediately invaded by new species. So these are the types of climate community. So what's the time now? Okay, 4 minutes now. The characteristic of climate community, we can say the vegetation of the climax community will have high ecological amplitude and they possess high tolerance. So because that is climax community, so that means high tolerance, the survivals towards the environmental conditions, that stable things, and it shows rich diversity in species composition. Species composition remains constant for many years. And because it can't replace quickly, it can't replace suddenly or immediately. So it will take time, many years. The community possesses a complex food chain. See, complex food chain and food web. So ecosystem will be balanced and self-sustainable, right? So the climax community is balanced and self-sustainable or maintain itself. So it's remain equilibrium between gross primary production to respiration. That is climate community characteristic. So do you have time to do only 3 questions? Just read it and do this one. Otherwise, take a screenshot of this one and do it, and we will discuss in next class because you have to prepare for next class also. No, 3 minutes now. You have class at 9 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Then take a screenshot of this question 1, 2. Did you take the screenshot of this question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, second one. Take this one. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
030. Ask one question, wait. Madam, that secondary succession is not a continuous process and it is occurs only when damage is happen in ecosystem. Is it correct? Yeah. Himaru Satsara. I hope you are clear now.
Yes, ma'am.
I understood what's the difference between secondary and primary?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good. Great. Right. Anybody having any doubts? So do these 3 questions as your homework. We will discuss the next class because you have lectures at 9 a.m. No? Okay. If you have any doubts, please ask. Lectures. Are you all okay with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.